What if the children the world threw away grew up to build the very world that once rejected them? What if the person with the least to give was the one who gave the most? This is not just a story of adoption. It's a story of love, loss, sacrifice, and the kind of quiet strength that changes everything. Her name was Mama Amina, a poor widow living in a forgotten village where mud huts cracked in the sun, and hope was something you whispered, not shouted. She had once been a wife. She was now a mother, alone, left to raise her young daughter, Sifa, with little more than a handful of vegetables and a will that refused to break. She sold tomatoes at the roadside, fetched water from the far stream, carried her grief like a shadow, silent, always behind her. One rainy night, lightning flashing across the village, Amina opened her creaky wooden door and found 2 bundles, not baskets of food, not forgotten tools, 2 crying babies, twins, no note, no name, just shivering skin and terrified eyes. The villagers came running. They pointed. They whispered, "Those children are cursed. Leave them. They bring bad luck. Touch them, and your daughter will suffer." But Amina didn't flinch. She didn't move away. She picked them up, wrapped them in her shawl, and brought them inside. She had no savings, no partner, no space. But she had something no one could see. A heart that made room for those the world had thrown away. She had nothing but her heart, so she gave it away. In this story, you'll follow the journey of Mali and Malik, twins nobody wanted, raised by a woman everyone overlooked. You'll see how love, not money, built them, how faith, not fortune, carried them, and how 25 years later, they returned to their village not with revenge, but with a gift that no one saw coming. Welcome to Pure African Tales, where the forgotten become unforgettable, where real stories echo across time, and love speaks louder than judgment. If you believe in the power of second chances, tap subscribe, click like, and stay with us until the very end, because what happens next will shock everyone. Before we talk about what they became, we need to talk about what they endured, because greatness doesn't always come from privilege. Sometimes it grows in silence, through struggle. Mali and Malik, the twins no one wanted, grew up under a roof made of patched tin and quiet love. Mama Amina raised them the only way she knew how, with warm hands, soft words, and food that barely stretched through the week. She sold okra, onions, and boiled maize by the roadside. Some days she came home with a few coins. Other days, she came home with nothing. But no matter how tired she always made time. At night, while the rest of the village slept, she lit a small oil lamp, barely enough to see the floor, and taught them what little she remembered from her own childhood. Letters scratched in the dirt, numbers written on banana leaves, songs hummed from old memories. And the twins? They listened. They learned. Fast. Quietly. Gratefully. They never asked for toys. They didn't even ask why the other children refused to play with them, because they already knew. Those are the witch twins. Bad things happen where they go. Stay away from them. They heard it all, in whispers, in side eyes, in silence. But they never turned bitter. They turned inward. They turned toward each other, and toward Amina. Molly had a soft spirit. She loved to sing to the chickens and draw in the dust. Malik was quiet but sharp. He could count faster than most adults in the village market. They shared everything: shoes, books, laughter, and above all, love for the woman who chose them. Every month, Mama Amina took them to the edge of the village to sit near the big school gates, just to watch other children go inside. They never entered. They never complained. They just watched and dreamed. One day, she'd say, one day, it will be your turn. And that hope, though small, was enough to keep them moving. Because while they were invisible to most of the world, there was one person who saw them fully. They were invisible to the world, visible only to love. Before we talk about the future they built, we have to talk about the moment everything changed. Not because they asked for it, but because kindness met opportunity. It was a normal morning, the kind Mama Amina had lived 100 times before. Hot sun, dusty air, a sack of tomatoes balanced on her head. She stood at the corner of the village market. Same spot, same prayer, hoping to sell enough to buy rice for the evening. Molly and Malik, now almost 10, stood by her side, helping carry water, arranging vegetables, smiling through the heat. They offered a drink to an old woman passing by, helped a blind man cross the road, then returned to counting coins, quietly. What they didn't know was that someone was watching. Across the road sat a tall man in a dark car, windows down, only to buy mangoes. His calm. But what he saw stopped something deeper in him. It wasn't just their politeness, it was their eyes. Focused, thoughtful, too sharp for their age, too kind for what they'd been through. The man stepped out, approached the small stall. "Are these your children?" he asked Mama Amina. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. He smiled, crouched to their level, and asked Molly her name. She answered softly. Malik added her age without being asked. The man chuckled, not out of amusement, but out of awe. "They're brilliant," he said, "and they shouldn't be here." At first, Amina thought he was just being kind. But then, he offered something unexpected. "I want to sponsor their education, fully. Uniforms, books, transport, all of it." Amina's lips parted, but no sound came. She had dreamed of this moment, but never believed it would knock this directly. She didn't answer right away. She thought about it for days. She had raised them alone. She had protected them. Could she let them go now, even if it meant something better? And then she remembered. "One day, it will be your turn." So she said yes. Within a week, the twins were enrolled in the town's top school, a place with glass windows and real desks, teachers who wore suits, classrooms that didn't leak when it rained. Molly cried when she got her first pair of shoes. Malik refused to take off his new school badge, even at home. But every weekend, they came back to Mama Amina, with new books, new words, and the same old love. And suddenly, the village began to see them differently. Not as curses, but as children with a future. Not because they changed who they were, but because one person looked again. She gave them a chance, and the world looked again. Before we talk about how they gave back, we must talk about how far they had come. Because time doesn't just age people. It reveals what they've truly grown into. It had been 25 years. A full generation since the day 2 crying babies were left in the rain. The day Mama Amina chose love over fear. The small village had changed. A little. New paint on some walls. A paved road at the market. But in many ways, it was still the same. The wind still whistled through the mango trees. The chickens still wandered freely. And at the very edge of the village sat a small, aging home. Inside it, Mama Amina now moved slowly. Her hair was silver. Her hands trembled when she stirred her tea. But her eyes, still warm, still waiting. She didn't expect much. She never had. But then, one dry morning, she heard footsteps and a knock, not hurried, not loud, just steady. When she opened the door, she saw 2 strangers at first, a woman in a white coat, a man in a crisp shirt. But then she looked closer, and the years melted away. Molly, Malik, no longer the hungry twins she once wrapped in cloth, now grown. Molly, a respected doctor, known for treating children in remote villages. Malik, a rising social entrepreneur who built schools and trained young farmers. They didn't just come back with degrees, they came back with purpose. Mama Amina stood frozen, then reached out with both hands, touching their faces like she needed to make sure they were real. And then she cried. Soft, silent, tears that had waited years to fall. Words spread like wind through the village. Did you hear? The twins have returned. They're not cursed. They're doctors. One of them built a company in the city. People who once looked away now stood in awe, mouths open, heads bowed. Some remembered the insults they had thrown. Others remembered crossing the road to avoid the twins. Now, those same people struggled to look Mama Amina in the eyes. But Amina didn't gloat. She didn't boast. She simply held their hands and smiled. Because this moment was never about revenge. It was about return. Ignored for years. Now impossible to forget. Before we talk about what they built for others, we must understand what they were building inside themselves. Because some victories are loud, but the deepest ones are quiet and rooted in love. The return of Molly and Malik stirred the whole village. People whispered in doorways. Children followed them through the streets. Elders nodded in approval, pretending they'd always believed. But no one was ready for what came next. On a bright afternoon, the twins called a village gathering, under the big baobab tree, where meetings were always held. Chairs were placed. The air buzzed with curiosity. Molly stood first. She didn't wear a lab coat. She wore a simple dress, like the ones Amina used to make by hand. Malik stood beside her, notebook in one hand, a humble smile on his face. Then came the announcement. "We are building a school," Malik said, "and a clinic, right here in the village." Gasps. Naming them both after one person, Molly added. The woman who raised us. The woman who chose us. Mama Amina. Construction began the next week. Bricks laid. Workers hired. The signboard was carved first, long before the roof even went up. The Amina Foundation for Hope. A large photograph of her, framed in gold, was placed inside a stone frame at the center of the courtyard. That photo became the first brick, not as a decoration, as a declaration. When the school officially opened, the entire village came, including those who had once called the twins cursed. But the most shocking moment came quietly. A group of elders, men who had led the crowd against Amina years ago, walked up to her slowly and kneeled, heads bowed, hands folded. They said nothing, but their silence was louder than any apology. Mama Amina reached out with shaking hands, touched each of their shoulders, then simply said, "You were wrong, but now, you see." She didn't cry. Not this time. Her pride was steady, her grace unshakable. Because what she had done in secret, in poverty, in hunger, in whispers, had bloomed in front of the whole world. They weren't ashamed of their beginnings. They honored them. Before we talk about the final chapter of this journey, we must pause and witness what healing looks like. Not in grand speeches, but in small moments that speak louder than any reward. The school opened its doors on a Monday morning. No ribbon, no ceremony, just laughter, and shoes thumping on smooth cement floors. Children filled the classrooms, some barefoot, others in borrowed uniforms, but all of them hopeful. They scribbled their names on chalkboards, wrote their first full sentences, read aloud without fear of mockery. The girl who once watched from outside the gate, Molly, now stood inside as a guest teacher. Across the compound, the clinic opened too. Simple walls, white curtains, clean benches. Malik, though not a doctor, brought his team. Nurses, young volunteers, traveling medical staff. Children were vaccinated. Elderly men received checkups for the first time in years. Women were taught how to care for wounds, babies, and each other. No one was charged. No one was judged. They were simply helped. And at the heart of it all, under the old mango tree near the school, sat Mama Amina. She didn't walk as fast anymore. Her eyes blinked slower. But her smile? Still bright, still full. Children ran to her. Not just the twins. All of them. She braided hair, told stories, shared meals under the shade of the tree that once held nothing but dust. One afternoon, a girl asked her, "Are you a teacher?" Amina chuckled and said, "No, child. I just believe in people." And that was enough. Because that's what legacy is. Not buildings, not banners, not plaques, but the quiet ripple of kindness, passed from one hand to another until the whole world feels it. What starts in poverty can grow into a legacy. Before we talk about how this story ends, we must talk about the words that made it last. Because buildings may fade, but lessons, they live forever. It was a cool morning in the village. The sky was soft, the trees still, and a crowd gathered near the school courtyard. Benches were arranged under shade, mothers in colorful wraps, boys climbing trees for a better view, elders sitting upright, waiting for something important. At the front stood Molly and Malik, no longer the timid twins of the past, but leaders in their own right. They hadn't come to boast. They hadn't come to list achievements. They had come to give something else. A truth the village had forgotten. Malik spoke first. His voice was calm but sure. We came from hunger, from whispers behind our backs, from hands that slammed doors, and one hand that opened them. He looked at Mama Amina, seated in the front row, eyes wet, smile still. The woman who raised us had no gold, no titles, just a heart that didn't give up. Then Molly spoke. She told them how she studied in silence, by candlelight on rainy nights, on scraps of paper with borrowed pencils. She said, "People think money made us, but it was love. Love that waited outside school gates. Love that fed us even when it went hungry." Some in the crowd nodded slowly. Others lowered their heads in quiet shame. A few wiped tears, remembering the day they turned away from those same children. But the twins didn't blame. They came to build, to remind. "You can't choose your start," Malik said, "but you can define your finish." They spoke of hardship not as a curse, but as a kind of teacher. A quiet one, a patient one. One that builds people strong, if they're loved through it. And that day, in a village once full of doubt and fear, a new lesson was planted. Not in books or walls, but in hearts. Love often begins in hardship and grows into something no one can forget. Before we say goodbye, let us remember how it all began, but with not with riches, quiet choice to love. Years passed. The school flourished. The clinic expanded. Children who once had no books now became teachers themselves. And in the middle of it all, under the old mango tree, sat Mama Amina. Not as a leader, not as a legend, but as herself, smiling, content, complete. One evening, as the sun dipped gently into the horizon, Amina leaned back in her chair, listening to the laughter of children. She closed her eyes, not from exhaustion, but from peace. She had lived long enough to see the seeds she planted bloom. And that night, without pain, without fear, she returned to rest. Years later, the village gathered once more, not to mourn, but to honor. Molly and Malik stood beside her grave, hand in hand. A single white stone marked the earth. No grand statue, no long inscription. Just 5 simple words carved into the base. She gave, and we grew. Behind them, children played under the trees, books clutched in their arms, laughter filling the air she once filled with prayers. Kindness needs no invitation. Love asks nothing but to be shared. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even in forgotten corners, love can change everything, then help us share that truth. Like this video, comment your thoughts. Subscribe to Pure African Tales, where real stories echo through generations, and unseen heroes finally get the honor they deserve. Until next time, keep listening, keep believing, and never forget, one quiet act of love can last a lifetime.